For 3 months, Sarah Morrison had spoken the same words over her husband's grave. 3 months since she'd watched the life drain out of Tom's eyes, his blood turning the Wyoming dust to dark mud. The makeshift cross was rough against her glove, splinters catching on the worn wool. The wind howled, whipping her black dress around her legs, a constant, mournful sound in a world that had gone silent. "I curse them," she whispered, her breath turning to smoke in the freezing air. Her green eyes, once full of hope, now burned with a cold, hard fire. "I curse every last one of those savages. By God and all that's holy, I'll never forgive them." The words were a vow, a covenant sealed in ice. Behind her, the settlement of Cedar Creek was a handful of rough-hewn cabins, huddled against the endless white. Smoke curled from the chimneys, carrying the scent of pine and burning oak, a promise of warmth she no longer felt she deserved. Sarah turned from the grave, her boots crunching in the deep snow. The few townsfolk who dared to brave the cold watched her pass. Their faces were a mixture of pity and a kind of weary impatience. She knew what they said when she was out of earshot. Poor Sarah Morrison, widowed at 23, all alone out here. What's to become of her? It was a question that was starting to sound more like a threat. Mrs. Elmira Hayes, the storekeeper's wife, stood on the porch of the general store, her face pinched in a mask of concern. "Sarah, dear," she called, her voice thick and syrupy, "you shouldn't be out in this weather. A young woman all alone." She let the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Alone was a synonym for vulnerable. Alone meant you were prey. "I'm quite well, Mrs. Hayes," Sarah replied, her voice flat, not breaking her stride. She'd learned fast about Cedar Creek kindness. It always came with a price. Her cabin was at the edge of the settlement, a one-room shelter Tom had built with his own 2 hands. She pushed the door open and leaned against it, the cold wood a shock through her coat. The mask of composure she wore for the town finally cracked, and the tears came, hot and bitter, freezing on her cheeks the moment they fell. The cabin was a museum of her dead husband. His rifle hung over the fireplace. His boots sat by the door, as if waiting for him to return. The bed they had shared felt as vast and empty as the prairie itself. Wiping her eyes with a raw determination, she moved to the small trunk in the corner. Inside was what was left of their savings, a pitifully small pile of coins after paying for the burial. Her mother's silver locket, Tom's pocket watch. It wasn't enough to get back east, and even if it was, there was nothing for her there. Their families in Boston had disowned them for daring to marry for love. They were alone then, and she was even more alone now. A heavy knock rattled the door, making her jump. She knew that knock. She knew the heavy-handed, entitled way he did everything. "Mrs. Morrison, it's Jacob Thornton. Just wanted to check on you." Sarah's jaw tightened until it ached. Thornton, the biggest rancher in the valley, a widower with eyes that lingered too long and hands that always found an excuse to touch. He'd been circling like a vulture since the day Tom was buried. "I'm well supplied, Mr. Thornton," she called back, her voice firm, making no move to unlatch the door. There was a pause. Then his voice came again, dripping with false concern. "Now, Sarah," he said, that patronizing tone she despised creeping in. "You can't just hide away in there. The town council's been talking. A woman alone, trying to work a homestead. It isn't proper. It isn't safe. You need a man's protection." The word protection made bile rise in her throat. She'd seen his brand of protection before. She remembered the faint, yellowing bruises on his late wife's arms, the ones the poor woman always tried to hide with long sleeves. She remembered the haunted, terrified look in her eyes before a sudden sickness had finally granted her an escape. "The only protection I need," Sarah called through the door, her voice ringing with finality, "is from the good Lord and my husband's rifle. Good day, Mr. Thornton." She heard him mutter something foul under his breath, then the crunch of his boots in the snow as he stalked away. Sarah crept to the small frosted window, watching his broad back disappear toward town. He was gone for now, but he was just the first. The banker, Josiah Mills, would be next, with his soft hands and greedy eyes. Then Pete Garrett from the saloon, who believed every woman had a price. They would all come calling, offering their own versions of protection. No. She pressed her palms against the cold glass, a single hard thought crystallizing in her mind. She would not be another frontier tragedy. She would not be bartered off like cattle or broken like Thornton's poor wife. There were other places, other towns where she could start over, where the ghost of Tom wasn't in every corner and his death wasn't a brand on her skin. That night, by the flickering light of a single candle, she made her plan. She packed only what she could carry: dried meat, hardtack, her warmest clothes, Tom's pistol, and every last bullet they owned. His rifle, heavy as it was, would come too. Out here, a rifle was the only law that mattered. In the small lean-to behind the cabin, her mare, Buttercup, nickered softly. Tom had insisted she have a gentle mount. Now that gentle horse was her only ticket out of this place of sorrow. She didn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind rattling the shutters, sounded like Thornton returning. When the first pale gray light of dawn touched the floorboards, she was already dressed, already moving. She led Buttercup through the silent, sleeping settlement. The world was pristine and deadly, buried under a fresh blanket of snow. Outside the town limits, she swung herself into the saddle. She took one last look back at the cluster of dark cabins that had promised a dream and delivered a nightmare. "Come on, girl," she whispered to the mare, turning her east toward Fort Laramie. It was a 5-day ride in good weather. In this snow, it could be much longer, but it was a new beginning. It was a chance. The first day was a blur of white. The snow muffled all sound, and she felt utterly alone in the vast, indifferent landscape. She pushed herself and the horse hard, stopping only when darkness fell to make a small, nervous camp in a grove of cottonwoods. The fire she risked seemed pathetic against the crushing dark and the howling of distant wolves. On the second day, she saw them. 3 dark specks on the horizon behind her, following her tracks in the snow. Even from a distance, she recognized the hulking shape of Jacob Thornton. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She urged Buttercup into a desperate trot, but the mare was already struggling, her legs sinking deep into the snow with every step. The men gained ground with terrifying speed. Sarah's hands shook so badly she could barely pull Tom's rifle from its scabbard. The road ahead curved into a dense stand of pines. If she could just reach the trees, she might have a chance to make a stand. A gunshot cracked through the frozen air. The bullet whistled past her ear, so close she felt its heat. Thornton's voice, distorted by the wind, echoed across the snow. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sarah. You're coming back with us?" She didn't answer. She twisted in the saddle and fired back wildly, the rifle's recoil nearly throwing her to the ground. The trees were so close, she could almost feel the safety of their dark branches. Another shot rang out. This time it wasn't followed by a whistle. It was followed by a scream, a terrible high-pitched sound of pain from Buttercup. The mare stumbled, her legs buckling. Blood, shockingly red, blossomed against her pale flank. Sarah was thrown from the saddle as the horse went down, the rifle flying from her grasp. She hit the snow hard, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. Scrambling to her feet, she pulled Tom's pistol from her belt and ran. Behind her, the coarse laughter of the men echoed off the hills. They thought they had her. They thought she was trapped. She plunged into the forest, the dense pine branches tearing at her clothes, scratching her face. The snow was even deeper here, a thick, heavy blanket that tried to pull her down with every step. She could hear them behind her, crashing through the undergrowth, taking their time now. They were enjoying the hunt. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet simply vanished. She was falling, tumbling down a steep, hidden embankment. The world was a spinning nightmare of white snow and dark branches and stabbing pain. She hit the bottom hard, landing in a heap that drove the last of the air from her lungs. When her vision finally cleared, she found herself in a narrow, rocky ravine. Her ankle screamed with a sharp, sickening pain. It was twisted, maybe broken. The pistol was gone, lost somewhere in the fall. Above her, she could hear the men calling to each other, their voices muffled by the snow and rock. They were looking for a way down. Panic gave her a final surge of strength. She dragged herself deeper into the ravine, crawling on her hands and knees, ignoring the fire in her ankle. The rock walls closed in, the shadows growing darker. Cold seeped into her bones, a deep, numbing chill that was worse than the pain. Night fell like a black curtain, swift and total. The voices above faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the canyon. Finally, she could go no further. She collapsed beneath a small rock overhang, her body shaking uncontrollably. She thought of Tom. She thought of their dreams of a new life, of the children they would never have. "I curse them," she whispered into the darkness, her voice a ragged croak. But now she wasn't sure who she meant, the natives who had taken her husband, or the white men who had hunted her down like an animal. Maybe in the end, savagery wore many faces. The cold wrapped around her like a final embrace. Sarah Morrison closed her eyes, ready to join her husband in the snow and the silence. The world returned in a haze of pain and flickering orange light. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. She was staring at a rough stone wall, the wall of a cave, and it was dancing with the light of a fire. A fire. A blessed, impossible fire was warming her frozen limbs. She tried to sit up, but her body was a block of ice in pain, refusing to obey. "Don't move!" The voice came from the shadows beyond the fire. It was deep, calm, and carried an accent that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. The accent she had heard in her nightmares for 3 months. A figure moved into the light. He was a young native man, his face weathered and handsome, framed by long, black hair. He wore buckskin and furs, and a knife was sheathed at his belt. He moved with a quiet, fluid grace that seemed to be a part of the mountains themselves. Terror gave her a strength she didn't know she had. She scrambled backward, her ankles shrieking in protest, until her back slammed against the cold cave wall. "Stay away from me!" The words were a dry, rasping sound. "You savage! You murderer!" The man stopped. His dark eyes were impossible to read. He held up his empty hands, a gesture of peace that she refused to believe. Then slowly, he reached for a small wooden bowl sitting beside the fire. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of herbs and hot broth. "Drink," he said, his English careful and precise. He set the bowl on the ground, just within her reach, and then retreated back to the shadows. Sarah stared at the bowl as if it were filled with poison. This was a trick. She'd heard stories. They pretended to be kind, to gain your trust. And then she shuddered, pulling the tattered remains of her dress tighter around her. But the smell of the broth was making her stomach cramp with a hunger so fierce it was a physical pain. "I'd rather die," she spat, but the words felt hollow even to her. The native man, the warrior, her mind screamed, simply shrugged. "Then die," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I waste no more time on a foolish white woman who prefers death to life." He turned his back on her, busying himself with some task in the darkness. Sarah watched him, her fear warring with a strange, new curiosity. This was his home, his shelter. She was completely at his mercy. The last thing she remembered was collapsing in the snow, praying for a quick end. How did she get here? Had he carried her? The thought made her skin crawl. Why? Why would one of them save her? Tom's blood was on their hands. All their hands. The warrior glanced over his shoulder, the firelight catching a long, thin scar that ran along his jaw. His expression was a blank mask. "I am called Joseph Crow Feather," he said, as if sensing her unspoken question. "By the whites, my people know me as Dakota." Sarah said nothing. To say his name would be to admit he was a person, and she couldn't do that. She wouldn't. These were the monsters from her nightmares, the ones who had destroyed her world. The silence in the cave grew, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rising howl of the wind outside. A new storm was coming. She could see the snow swirling past the cave entrance, a curtain of white death. Despite her resolve, her body betrayed her. The warmth of the fire, the sheer exhaustion, it was too much. Her eyelids felt like lead weights. She fought sleep, terrified of what would happen if she closed her eyes. But it was a losing battle. She drifted into a restless, feverish dream, filled with the thunder of hooves and the screams of dying men. She woke to the pale gray light of dawn. The fire had been fed while she slept. Fresh wood had been added. And there was something else. A pile of thick furs lay near her, and one had been draped over her body. The savage had touched her while she slept. The thought was a violation, making her recoil, but she couldn't deny the warmth it had provided. Joseph sat near the cave entrance, his back to her, watching the storm. He was as still as the mountains themselves. "Storm grows worse," he said, without turning around. 3, maybe 4 days before it passes. 4 days trapped in a cave with a killer. Panic clawed at her throat. She had to get out. She tried to stand, to test her injured ankle, and a bolt of white-hot pain shot up her leg. She cried out before she could stop herself. Joseph turned at the sound. Before she could protest, he was kneeling beside her. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he started to examine her ankle through the torn leather of her boot. "Don't touch me!" she shrieked, jerking her leg away. "I said don't touch me, you savage!" His hands froze. For a split second, something flickered in his dark eyes. Hurt, anger. She couldn't tell. Then the mask was back in place. "Your ankle is twisted, not broken," he said, his voice calm and even. "It needs care, or you will not walk on it again. But if the white woman prefers to suffer—" He shrugged the same infuriating, eloquent shrug and returned to the fire. Her stomach growled, a loud, embarrassing rumble that echoed in the quiet cave. The bowl of broth from the night before was still there, cold and congealed. Joseph glanced at it, then started preparing something new in a small iron pot he produced from a leather pack. An iron pot. He probably stole it from a dead settler. The smell of cooking meat filled the small space, and her mouth watered despite herself. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her body was screaming for food, even as her mind recoiled at the thought of taking anything from him. Why? The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. He looked up, his dark eyes questioning. "Why save me?" she clarified, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Your people killed my husband. You kill whites. Why not just leave me in the snow to die?" He was quiet for a long time, stirring the pot. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy. "My people say the storm spirits led me to you. To leave you to die would have angered them." He paused, then added, his voice even quieter, "And not all my people kill whites, just as not all whites kill my people." "Liar!" The word was harsh, ripped from her throat. "I saw what your kind did to our wagon train. I saw the bodies." Her voice broke. "My kind?" For the first time, there was a hard edge to his voice. "Was it Lakota who attacked you? Cheyenne? Arapaho? Or do all native people look the same to you? White eyes?" She faltered. She didn't know. In the smoke and chaos and terror of the attack, all she had seen were painted faces. All she had heard were war cries that turned her blood to ice. The soldiers had just called them hostiles. "I am Shoshone," he said, seeing the uncertainty in her eyes. "My people trade with the whites. We guide them through the mountains. We have no war with your kind." His jaw tightened. "Though your kind makes war on us all the same." He ladled a thick, fragrant stew into the bowl and placed it near her, along with a piece of freshly cooked flatbread. This time, her hunger was too powerful to deny. She snatched the bowl and ate like a wolf, not even tasting it, driven by a primal need to fill the emptiness inside her. He watched her, and when she was finished, he refilled the bowl without a word. The second time, she ate more slowly. It was rabbit, she thought, tender and rich. "Thank you," she mumbled, hating the words, but unable to stop them. He simply nodded. The day passed in a tense silence. Joseph worked on his gear, sharpening his knife, repairing a set of snowshoes. Sarah dozed, her body desperately trying to heal. When she woke again, it was dark, and the storm was shrieking like a banshee. He offered her more food and a hot tea made from pine needles that warmed her from the inside out. "Tomorrow I will look at your ankle," he said, breaking the long silence. "The swelling should be down." "I told you not to touch me." "Then you will crawl," he replied, his voice flat. "It is your choice." He paused, a flicker of dark humor in his eyes. "Though crawling to Fort Laramie in this storm seems foolish. Escape." The word sent a chill down her spine. She was his prisoner. He had saved her from the storm, but for what? She had heard the horrifying stories about what happened to white women who were captured. She pulled the fur blanket tighter around her shoulders. As if reading her mind, Joseph's expression hardened. "I am not what you think," he said quietly. "To force a woman brings dishonor to a man's spirit. It makes him less than an animal." She wanted to call him a liar. She wanted to cling to her hatred like a shield. But there was something in the steady, unwavering gaze of his dark eyes, something in the way he kept his distance, that made her doubt. He could have done anything to her while she slept. Instead, he had covered her and kept the fire alive. She drifted off to sleep again, and this time, her dreams of Tom were tangled with images of dark eyes and a gentle touch, of a strange, impossible safety found in the heart of enemy territory. The storm raged for 3 more days. For 3 days they were trapped in the cave, two mortal enemies bound together by the weather. Joseph was a surprisingly considerate captor, if that's what he was. He rigged up a hide for privacy. He helped her hobble outside when the wind died down. He never touched her unless it was absolutely necessary. By the 4th day, Sarah found herself watching him. She learned the scar on his jaw was from a mountain cat he'd fought when he was just a boy. She learned the intricate beadwork on his buckskin shirt was made by his sister, who had died of the white man's sickness, the fever, 2 winters ago. He spoke of his family with a quiet grief that sounded achingly familiar. On the 5th morning, she woke to silence. The storm had broken. Sunlight streamed into the cave, making the icicles at the entrance glitter like a king's jewels. Joseph was grinding herbs with a smooth stone, preparing a poultice. "Your ankle," he said without looking up. "The swelling is down. It must be wrapped." She hesitated. Every part of her screamed in protest at the thought of him touching her, but her ankle throbbed with a dull, constant ache, and she knew he was right. "I can do it myself," she said, her voice stiff. He watched, his face unreadable, as she fumbled with the strips of leather he gave her. After several minutes of frustrating, painful failure, she threw the bandages down. "Fine," she muttered, hating herself. "Do it." His hands were incredibly gentle as he unwrapped her swollen foot. She forced herself to watch his face, not his hands, the intense concentration in his eyes, the practiced efficiency of his movements. It reminded her of the doctor back home. "You've done this before," she said, the words slipping out. "Many times," he replied, securing the bandage. "Hunting accidents, war." He looked up at her. "A medicine man taught me." As he was putting his supplies away, she noticed it for the first time. A stiffness in his left shoulder, the way he favored it when he moved. "You're hurt," she said, surprised by the note of concern in her own voice. He glanced at her, then touched his shoulder. "An old wound. The cold makes it ache." "From the mountain cat?" she asked. He shook his head, his face going hard and flat. "From a soldier's bullet." The words dropped into the space between them like stones. Her husband killed by natives. Him shot by soldiers. It was a tangled, bloody knot, and she had no idea how to undo it. Joseph seemed to read her mind. "Tomorrow we travel," he said, his voice all business again. "The weather will hold. Your ankle is strong enough." "Travel where?" she asked, her old fear returning. Was he taking her to his village? "To Fort Bridger," he said calmly. "It is 3 days' walk. You will be safe there, with your people." She stared at him, stunned into silence. You're letting me go?" His dark eyes met hers. "You were never a prisoner, white woman. Only a foolish person I saved from the snow." Relief should have washed over her. Instead, she felt a strange, unsettling confusion. For days, she had been his captive. But that wasn't true, was it? He could have left her to die. He could have done 1,000 terrible things to her. Instead, he had tended her wounds, shared his food, and kept her safe from the storm. "Why?" she asked again, the question that had been haunting her since she woke up in this cave. "Why help me?" He stared into the fire for a long time before he answered. "2 winters ago," he began, his voice low, "when the soldiers shot me, I crawled for a day before I collapsed. A white woman found me, the wife of a missionary. She could have left me to die. She could have called the soldiers to finish their work." He touched his shoulder again. "Instead, she hid me in her root cellar. She brought me food and medicine until I was strong enough to travel. She told me all life is sacred. She said helping an enemy makes us better than those who only know hate." Sarah felt something crack deep inside her, a fissure in the wall of hatred she had built around her heart. But my husband. I am sorry for your loss, Joseph said simply, but I did not kill your husband. My people did not attack your wagons. To hate all of us for what some did. It is like hating all wolves because one took a sheep. The logic was inescapable, even if her heart wasn't ready to accept it. She watched him pack their meager supplies, his movements sure and competent. Everything about him spoke of a life lived in harmony with this harsh, unforgiving land. Teach me, she said suddenly, the words surprising them both. He looked up, his eyebrows raised. Teach you what? How to survive, she said, gesturing to the vast snow-covered wilderness outside the cave. I almost died because I didn't know how. If you're taking me to the fort anyway. Teach me. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Then slowly, he nodded. The first lesson, he said, a faint smile touching his lips, is that pride kills faster than the cold. For the rest of that day, Joseph became her teacher. He showed her how to build a fire that would burn all night with just a few logs. He pointed out which plants, even in the dead of winter, could be eaten. The bright red rose hips, still clinging to their thorny branches, the sweet inner bark of the pine tree. He taught her how to read the clouds, to feel the subtle shifts in the wind that foretold another storm. Sarah was a desperate and eager student. Every skill she learned was another piece of armor against the world that had tried to kill her. As darkness fell, he showed her how to set snares for rabbits, his hands guiding hers as she worked the thin, tough strips of sinew. The closeness, the warmth of another person after so much cold and loneliness, was both terrifying and comforting. Your husband, Joseph said quietly as they worked by the firelight. He was a good man? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that. They only saw her as a widow, a problem to be solved. Yes, she whispered, her throat tight. He was kind. He wanted to build a life here. For our children. Her voice broke. Joseph nodded, giving her grief the space it needed. After a moment, he spoke again. My woman, he said softly, died of the fever last spring. We were to be married in the summer. He held up a piece of soft, tooled leather he'd been working on. This was to be part of her wedding dress. Their shared losses created a strange, unexpected bridge between them. Sarah found herself looking at him, truly looking, for the first time. Not as a savage, not as an enemy, but as another person drowning in sorrow. What was her name? She asked. Ayana, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It means eternal blossom. Ifum. She laughed like water flowing over stones. They talked late into the night. She told him about Tom's terrible singing voice. He told her about Ayana's gift with wild horses. When Sarah finally fell asleep, her dreams were calm for the first time in months. She woke once in the night to see him sitting silhouetted against the cave entrance, keeping watch. The sight should have scared her. Instead, she felt safe. The next morning they left the cave. The world was a blinding expanse of white and blue. As they began the 3-day journey to Fort Bridger, Sarah found herself oddly reluctant to leave the shelter that had been both her prison and her sanctuary. Out here, in the vast wilderness, they were just two people trying to survive. But at the fort, he would be the enemy again. The fragile understanding that had grown between them would be shattered by the hatred of the world. As they walked, him breaking a trail through the deep snow for her, Sarah wondered if she was walking toward civilization or away from the only real safety she had known since Tom's death. The journey was grueling. By midday, Sarah was exhausted, her bandaged ankle aching with every step. Joseph, seeing her struggle, called a halt. He built a small fire, and they rested, sharing a piece of dried meat in silence. 2 more days, he said, his eyes on the clouds building in the west. But another storm is coming. We need to find shelter. He knew of a place nearby, an old abandoned trapper's cabin. They reached it just as the first flakes of snow began to fall. The roof had partially collapsed, but the stone fireplace was intact and the walls were solid. Working together, they patched the worst of the holes with mud and branches. By the time the storm hit with its full, screaming fury, they were safe inside, a crackling fire pushing back the cold in the dark. You knew this was coming, Sarah said, watching him lay out their dwindling supplies. He nodded. The wind spoke of it. The animals knew. The thought of Tom, a city man who had never learned to read the signs of this wild land, brought a fresh wave of sadness. She told Joseph about Boston, about the rigid, suffocating life they had left behind, about their dream of freedom. Men took him, she said, her voice hard. Men full of hate. My father was a peace chief, Joseph said, his voice low and heavy with memory. He believed in trading with the whites. He guided them through the mountains. One day, soldiers came. They said some horses were stolen. My father showed them our horses. It didn't matter. They shot him where he stood. They said all Indians were thieves. The injustice of it, so similar to her own, stole her breath. Is it so different? He asked, his dark eyes meeting hers across the fire. Your husband was killed for being white. My father was killed for being Indian. Both were killed by men who see only an enemy, not a person. The truth of his words was a weight in the small cabin. I can't forgive them, she whispered. I can't forget. No one asks you to forget, he said gently. But hate is a heavy stone. It does not bring back the dead. It only makes your own journey harder. As the night wore on, a strange tension grew between them. In the soft firelight, the harsh lines of his face seemed to soften. When he caught her looking at him, a spark seemed to pass between them, a moment of connection that was both frightening and exhilarating. You're cold, he said, noticing her shiver. He stood and draped another fur over her shoulders. His fingers brushed her arm, and a jolt, like lightning, shot through her. She pulled away quickly, her heart hammering. What was wrong with her? This was one of them. The enemy. Tom had only been dead for 3 months. It was just gratitude, she told herself. Just the strain of their situation. But when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of strong hands and dark, gentle eyes. The next day, the storm still raged, trapping them in the small cabin. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their worlds. The tension between them grew, a current of unspoken feelings that hummed in the small space. That evening, as he passed her a skin of water, their hands touched. The contact was brief, but it felt like a brand. She jerked back, spilling the water. I'm sorry, she stammered in Sarah. It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it in his deep, accented voice made her freeze. You shake like a frightened rabbit, he said softly. I will not harm you. I know, she whispered, and the realization shocked her. She did know. The fear was gone, replaced by something far more confusing, far more dangerous. The next morning the sky was clear. It was time to go. One more day's journey to Fort Bridger. One more day until their strange, impossible connection would be severed forever. As they prepared to leave, a wave of disappointment, so strong it was almost grief, washed over her. The journey ahead was through the snow. But the real journey, she knew, would be the one away from the feelings she could neither understand nor accept. The last day of their journey was under a sky so painfully blue it was hard to look at. They walked in silence, the unspoken words hanging heavy between them. At midday they crested a ridge, and Joseph stopped dead, his body going rigid. What is it? Sarah asked, her heart lurching. He pointed down into the valley below. Smoke, he said, his voice grim, and death birds. She saw them then, a thin pillar of the wrong kind of smoke rising into the air, and below it, vultures circling, black specks against the white snow. They made their way down into the valley, and the scene that unfolded before them was a vision from hell. It had been a small winter camp. Now it was a smoking ruin. The lodges were burned, belongings scattered, and bodies. Bodies everywhere, half covered by the snow. They were not warriors. They were women, children, old men. Sarah saw a mother still clutching her 2 small children, an old man with his hands frozen in a gesture of peace. Her stomach heaved, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, trying not to be sick. My God, she whispered, who would do this? Soldiers, Joseph said, his voice flat and dead. His face was a mask of stone, but she could see the rage simmering in his eyes. This is what they call peace. He moved through the massacre, his face a study in grief and fury, checking for survivors, though it was clear there were none. This was the other side of the story, the side she had never wanted to see. The soldiers she had thought of as protectors were capable of this slaughter. He stopped beside the body of a young woman, her beautiful beaded dress torn and stained with blood. He gently closed her staring eyes and murmured a prayer in his own language. When he stood up, there were tears on his cheeks. "This is why my people fight," he said, his voice thick with a pain that was 1,000 years old. "Not for hate, for survival." Sarah thought of her own curse, her vow of eternal hatred. Standing in this valley of death, her words tasted like ash in her mouth. "We should go," Joseph said, his voice raw. But then he stopped. He was looking at a collapsed shelter on the edge of the camp. "Wait." He moved quickly, and Sarah heard it too. A faint, weak sound. A cry. Joseph dropped to his knees, pulling away the debris. A moment later, he lifted out a small bundle of furs. Inside was a baby, a tiny living baby, his dark eyes wide with shock and fear. "He is strong," Joseph said, his voice full of wonder, as he cradled the infant. "His mother must have hidden him." Without a second thought, Sarah pulled off her shawl. "Give him to me," she said, her voice firm. "I know how to care for a baby." Joseph carefully handed the child over. He was impossibly light, and his tiny hand immediately gripped her finger. "We can't leave him," she said, knowing even as she spoke the danger she was inviting into her life. "The soldiers at the fort," Joseph warned, "they will not want an Indian child." She knew what he meant. They would see the baby as a burden, or worse, a future enemy. "Then we don't take him to the soldiers," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised her. "There has to be someone, a missionary, a family." He was watching her, his expression unreadable. "You would do this? Save this child?" She looked down at the tiny, innocent face, then back at the carnage around them. "He's not an Indian child," she said softly. "He's just a child." Something shifted in Joseph's eyes. He nodded, then began to search the ruined camp for anything they could use. A cradle board, some dried milk. They left the valley of death behind them, the baby bundled safely against Sarah's chest. His warmth was a small, steady flame against the cold of her grief. As evening fell, they saw the walls of Fort Bridger in the distance. The flag fluttering in the wind was a symbol of safety, of civilization. But Sarah's steps slowed. Once they passed through those gates, this strange, intense world she had shared with Joseph would be over. He would go his way, and she would go hers. "Sarah," he stopped, turning to face her. "These days with you, you are not like the other whites. You see with a clear heart. Your spirit is strong." He stepped closer. "I know you grieve. I know you hate. But hate is a winter that kills everything. You deserve the spring." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know how to stop hating," she whispered. "It's all I have left of him." "No," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have the memories of love. That is what you carry forward." The baby stirred, making a small, hungry sound. As she fed him, Sarah felt the ice around her heart finally, truly begin to thaw. "What will you do?" she asked. "Go back to my people," he said. He paused. "And you?" "I don't know," she said honestly. The thought of returning to Cedar Creek, to Thornton, was unbearable. "You could come with me," he said, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear it. The words hung between them, a fragile, impossible bridge. For a wild, breathless moment, she imagined it. A life with him, among his people, raising this orphan child as their own. "I can't," she whispered, the words tasting of regret. "Your people would never accept me, and I'm not ready." He nodded, his face a mask, but she saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. At the gates of the fort, they stopped. "I can't go closer," he said. "Soldiers will shoot first and ask questions later." This was it. This was goodbye. She turned to face him, the baby a warm weight between them. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling small and useless. "For saving my life, for teaching me, for—" Her voice broke. He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You saved yourself, Sarah Morrison," he said softly. "I only showed you the way." He looked down at the baby. "Teach him of both worlds so he can walk between them." "What should I call him?" she asked. "Samuel," he said. "It means heard by God." He was heard even in the silence. Then he stepped back, raised a hand in farewell, and turned. He walked away, melting back into the mountains that had saved them. Sarah stood and watched until he was gone. Then she turned and walked through the gates of the fort, toward a future she could not yet see. The weight of her hatred was gone, replaced by something infinitely more complex and infinitely lighter. The moment Sarah stepped inside Fort Bridger, the fragile peace she had found in the wilderness shattered. The sergeant at the gate took one look at the native baby in her arms and sneered. "Indian brat," he muttered, "should have left it for the wolves." In the muddy courtyard, surrounded by the noise and the stink of civilization, she felt more alone than she had in the cave. A voice called her name. It was Lieutenant James Crawford, one of the soldiers who had found their wagon train after the attack. His eyes widened in shock, first at seeing her alive, then at the baby she carried. "Mrs. Morrison! What in God's name happened to you?" "I found him," Sarah said, her voice hard, cutting off his question. "His family was killed. By soldiers." Crawford's face hardened. "That would be the Cheyenne camp. They'd been raiding supply lines." "It's war, Mrs. Morrison. Unfortunate, but necessary." "Necessary?" Her voice rose. "I saw women and children, Lieutenant. I saw old men." "You don't understand," he snapped. "These savages killed your husband. Have you forgotten that?" The words were a physical blow, but she stood her ground. "Not these people, and not this child." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What are you going to do with it?" "Find him a home," she said. That evening she met the Wheelers, a missionary couple the lieutenant had mentioned. They were kind, helping her bathe and feed Samuel without judgment, but their kindness couldn't protect her. Later that night, the fort commander, Major Harrison Crenshaw, burst into their quarters. He was a hard man with cold, dead eyes. "I hear you've brought a savage whelp into my fort, Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice like grinding rocks. "I've brought an orphan child, Major." "Same thing," Crenshaw snarled. "Nits make lice. That baby will grow up to kill men like your husband." He turned his venom on the Wheelers, then back to Sarah. "You have until noon tomorrow to get rid of it. After that, I'll handle the matter myself." The threat was clear. He would kill the baby. Panic seized her. After Crenshaw left, the Reverend Wheeler spoke. "There's a freight wagon leaving for South Pass City in the morning. You could go with them. Take the child somewhere safe." But where? She had no money, no one. "Wait," Mrs. Wheeler said. "A letter came for you weeks ago." She handed Sarah an envelope. The handwriting was her aunt's in San Francisco. Her family hadn't forgotten her after all. Her aunt had heard about Tom's death and was offering her a home, a job in her dressmaking shop. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. "I'll go," Sarah said, her voice shaking with relief. The next morning she faced the wagon master, a grizzled, suspicious man named Ezra Holbrook. He didn't want to take a woman traveling alone, especially not one with what he called a breed baby. But his wife was ill, and he grudgingly agreed to take Sarah on to help with the cooking. As she was leaving the fort, Lieutenant Crawford stopped her one last time. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. People won't understand." "Then I'll find people who do," she said, turning her back on him. She climbed aboard the wagon, settling Samuel in her arms. As the wagon train pulled out, her eyes scanned the tree line at the edge of the fort. For a heart-stopping moment, she saw him, a figure in buckskin, half hidden in the shadows. Joseph. He was watching over her. Their eyes met across the distance. A silent promise, a silent goodbye. Then he was gone, swallowed by the wilderness. Sarah didn't look back. Ahead lay California, a new life. But she knew she wasn't leaving the past behind. She was carrying it with her, transformed. She carried the memory of Tom's love and the lessons of Joseph's wisdom. She was no longer just a widow. She was a survivor and a mother. 3 days out from the fort, the riders appeared. 3 men, silhouetted against the vast sky. Sarah's blood ran cold. She recognized the leader instantly. Jacob Thornton. "Sarah Morrison," he yelled, his voice carrying on the wind. "You've got something that belongs to the good people of Cedar Creek." "I belong to no one," she shouted back, clutching Samuel so tightly he began to cry. Ezra Holbrook leveled his rifle. "The lady's paid her passage. She's under my protection. Move along." Thornton laughed, a nasty, brutish sound. We're not leaving without her, and we're not leaving that savage spawn with her. The tension was a coiled snake, ready to strike. The men of the wagon train raised their rifles, but they were outnumbered. This was it. This was where it ended. Then Thornton's eyes shifted, looking past her, his face suddenly contorted with fear and surprise. Sarah turned. Standing on a ridge not 50 yards away was a lone figure. He was holding a bow, an arrow already nocked and aimed directly at Thornton's heart. It was Joseph. He had never left. He had been following them, watching over them, a silent guardian angel forged in the wilderness. This ain't over, Thornton snarled, his bravado gone. He wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men scrambling after him. The threat was gone, for now. But Sarah knew Thornton would be back. That night she couldn't sleep. The next day and the next, she scanned the horizon, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. On the 5th day, she went to a small stream to wash some of Samuel's things. She thought she was safe. She was wrong. He stepped out of the cottonwood trees so silently she didn't hear him until he spoke. Finally got you alone, Jacob Thornton said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. Now you're going to drop that filthy brat and you're going to come back with me. I'll tell everyone I rescued you. You can still have a respectable life. Never, she spat, fumbling for the small knife Joseph had given her. He laughed, a low, ugly sound. You think that little thing is going to stop me? The arrow appeared as if from nowhere. It took Thornton high in the shoulder, spinning him around with a strangled scream. He collapsed to the ground, clutching the feathered shaft. Joseph stepped out of the trees, another arrow already on his bowstring, his face a mask of cold fury. Sarah, he said, his eyes never leaving Thornton. Are you hurt? No, she whispered, her voice shaking. How? I follow, he said simply, to keep you safe. Thornton was on the ground, whimpering, his face pale with fear. Please, Sarah, he begged, don't let him kill me. Joseph looked at her, his eyes asking the question. Her word was his command, life or death. It was her choice. She thought of Tom. She thought of the massacred village. She thought of the endless cycle of violence and hate. Let him go, she said. Joseph lowered his bow, his expression a mixture of surprise and respect. Together they pulled the arrow from Thornton's shoulder and bandaged the wound. The man stared at them, his eyes wide with a pain and confusion that went deeper than his injury. Why? He croaked as Sarah helped him onto his horse. Because someone has to be better than you, she said. She watched him right away, a broken man. When he was gone, she turned to Joseph, and the barriers she had built around her heart finally crumbled. She fell against him, her face buried in his chest, and for the first time in a long time, she cried not tears of grief, but of relief. I thought I'd never see you again, she sobbed. My path, he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. It keeps leading back to you. He pulled back, his work-roughened hand cupping her cheek. Where you go, I follow. My heart stays with you. Just then, the search party from the wagon train, led by Ezra Holbrook, burst through the trees. Joseph tensed, ready to disappear. No, Sarah said, taking his hand. No more hiding. She faced the wagon master, her chin held high. This man saved my life. Again, I want him to travel with us. The men of the wagon train stared, their hands on their rifles. Holbrook looked from Sarah to Joseph, his eyes narrowed. Finally he spoke. A man's word is all he's got out here, Indian or white, he said, lowering his rifle. He can ride with us, but he earns his keep. That night the air around the campfire was thick with suspicion, but Joseph had brought in 2 deer, and a full belly could quiet a lot of mistrust. Sarah sat beside him, sharing her plate, ignoring the stares. I imagine a place, she said softly, looking up at the endless stars, where Samuel can grow up knowing both worlds, where he doesn't have to choose, where we, she stopped, her cheeks flushing, where we can build something new, Joseph finished for her. Not the Indian way or the white way, our way. He shifted, his shoulder brushing against hers. Perhaps, he said, his voice barely a whisper, this is why the spirits brought us together. 2 weeks later, in a high mountain pass shrouded in mist, Their new world was put to the test. A cavalry patrol, 20 men strong, appeared out of the fog. The captain, a hard-faced man, his eyes fixing on Joseph. "You there, Indian? State your business." "He's with us," Sarah said, climbing down from the wagon, Samuel on her back. "He's our guide." The captain's cold gaze swept over her, lingering on the native child. "Ma'am, are you aware—" "I am aware," she interrupted, "that this man has more honor than any I have ever met." "Captain Morrison," the officer said, and Sarah's heart stopped. "Morrison." "I am Sarah Morrison," she replied, "widow of Thomas Morrison." The captain's expression changed. "Tom Morrison? From Boston? I served with him at Fort Laramie." His eyes flickered to Joseph, then back to her. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, but that doesn't explain—" He never finished the sentence. Gunfire erupted from the rocks above them. An ambush. A Blackfoot war party descended, painted and screaming. Chaos exploded. The cavalry returned fire. Joseph shoved Sarah under a wagon, then came up with his bow, firing arrows with deadly precision. But he wasn't fighting the soldiers. He was fighting the Blackfoot, defending the wagon train. The battle was short and brutal. The combined fire of the soldiers and Joseph's lethal skill drove the attackers back into the mist. When it was over, Captain Morrison approached, his arm bleeding. "You're Indian," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "He fought with us." "I fought for her," Joseph said, gesturing to Sarah, "and for the child." The captain stared at them. The officer's widow, the native warrior, the orphan baby, a strange, impossible family. "Tom was a good man," the captain said slowly. "He judged men by their actions, not their birth." He looked at Joseph, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "I won't stand in your way, but the world will." "We know," Sarah said, "but we choose our own path." That night, by a quiet stream, she finally said the words, "I love you." His kiss was the answer, gentle and sure. "You are my heart's home, Sarah Morrison," he whispered. 3 weeks later, they stood on a ridge overlooking the golden hills of California. The long journey was over, but their new one was just beginning. In the distance, the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean. Sarah held Samuel in her arms, Joseph's hand warm and strong in hers. The vow she had made at Tom's grave, the curse against the savage, felt like it belonged to another person, in another life. The only savagery, she now knew, was a heart closed to love. The road ahead would be hard. There would be hatred and prejudice, but they would face it together. A widow who had learned to live again, a warrior who had found a new tribe to protect, and a child who would be a bridge between two worlds. Thank you for listening to this story. What part of Sarah and Joseph's journey resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed their story, please don't forget to subscribe for more tales of courage, survival, and the enduring power of love.